Candyman, 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 Candyman. I'm not saying it a fifth time because I do not want that motherfucker to come out of my bathroom mirror.
Pussy!
So 2020's been a pretty shit year. Anyway, I thought I'd do something new on the channel, so I've watched a lot of first watches this year. Nothing's really came out in theaters, obviously, but I've seen a lot of movies that I hadn't seen before this year, so I thought I'd stop and rank all of them since we're halfway through the year. I've seen 155 movies, so buckle in because this is going to be a long video because I don't know how to shut the fuck up. Coming in at number 155, last place, is Mary. This was a shit film. It sucked as a horror film. Gary Oldman could not save this movie. So disappointing. Do not watch this film. 154 is Don't Knock Twice. Probably just as bad as Mary, another horror film, but Gary Oldman's not in it, so I didn't have any expectation for this movie, which is why it's higher than Mary. I should have mentioned, like the last film, this is a film my stepbrother made me watch, and I hated it. Room for Rent. I don't know what this movie is. I don't know who this movie is for. Another movie, I wasn't made to watch it, but I agreed to watch this with some friends for some reason. The Lovebirds. Okay, it's a new movie. Yes, it's one of the few 2020 movies that came out, but it freaking sucks. I do think Camille tries to give a noble performance, but what is this movie? What is it supposed to be? This movie just felt like it was having an identity crisis the entire time. Red Riding Hood. Sadly, I can't say anyone forced me to watch this or influenced me to watch this. I just watched it for some reason, and it's not good. Scary Movie 2. None of the humor hits for me. This movie just isn't for me. The Mandela Effect. They try to make a movie about a very interesting concept, but the movie is not nearly as interesting as the concept of the Mandela Effect actually is. The Boy. Yeah, guys, I don't know why I decided to watch so many bad horror movies this year. I watched this while I was drunk, so, I really didn't know what was happening because of that. One of the more disappointing movies of the year for me is Scoob. I wasn't expecting much, and I'm very glad I wasn't because I don't think this movie had much of the heart that a lot of Scooby-Doo properties do. And the humor in this movie is just atrocious. The Nun is the Conjuring universe without James Wan. The Conjuring universe without James Wan is pretty bad. Same for the next movie on the list, The Curse of El Dorena. I didn't like either of them. Okay, Annabelle fans, if you're out there, do not come at me. I haven't seen the Annabelle movies. Porcelain dolls really freak me out, so just calm down, please. Hellboy, some of the action is good enough, and David Harbour, he really tries in this movie, but he couldn't do anything with that script, let's be honest. Trespassers, kind of interesting movie, pretty stupid movie. Okay, I don't really know if I should say it's a stupid movie, but the characters in the movie are really stupid. Unfriended, really similar situation to Trespassers, but the first 30 minutes of this movie was actually pretty interesting and kind of enjoyable, and then it just completely falls off the rails. The Night Clerk, Chai Sheridan, I think he gave a pretty damn good performance in this movie. And Ana de Armas is always easy on the eyes. Observe and Report. Okay, comedy with me is always very hit and miss, and the comedy in this movie was way more miss than it was hit for me. I do like the cast. I like Seth Rogen and Michael Pena both a lot, but this movie just wasn't for me. Same with Scary Movie. Scary Movie, the type of humor in those movies, it's not for me. That humor doesn't work for me, but, it's nice seeing the Ghostface Killer getting stoned. That was pretty damn funny. Happy Death Day to You. It's an okay movie, but it's a lot like the first one, which is why it's so low on the list. Wonder Woman Bloodlines. If you guys watch my channel, you already know my thoughts on this movie. Really bland, pretty boring, basic, had no heart, no charm, no compassion like the original animated Wonder Woman movie did. X-Men Dark Phoenix. It's basically as good as you thought it would be going in. Seriously, why can they not just get the Dark Phoenix storyline right? Bad Match. This is basically a movie about a Tinder date gone batshit crazy. And the movie is so ridiculously stupid, but pretty enjoyable at the same time. Seriously, if the ending to this movie was better, it would probably be higher on the list. Triple Frontier. So I really love Ben Affleck a lot as an actor. He's one of my favorite actors. But man, this movie was so boring. There were a couple action scenes that were really entertaining, but I didn't like the route they took Ben Affleck's character, and just, this movie was boring overall. It was way too long in my opinion. Pet Sematary is such a weird movie to me. The main character is an idiot, first of all. And just the concept of Pet Sematary is so stupid to me. I don't know why I watched this movie, but I did. 30 minutes or less. Okay, yes, the only reason this movie is this high is because of the cast. Jesse Eisenberg is great in this movie, and I like Michael Pena, as I mentioned earlier. And the humor in this actually works better for me than it does in Observer and Report, but it's still not a good movie. Limitless. You know, the first 30 minutes of this movie was actually really intriguing and entertaining to me, and then towards the back half of the movie, everything just kind of fell apart and it got boring, and I was like, I don't even know what I'm watching anymore. Into the Grizzly Maze, I just watched this one day because I was bored, and it actually turned out to be a little better than I thought it was going to be, but still not that good. I think Billy Bob Thornton gives a really good performance in this, actually, and he kind of made this movie for me. I should say he made me not hate this movie. Brightburn, you have a really good movie here if it's executed properly. And I think it could have been executed much, much better. I mean, basically, Superman that's the spawn of Satan. That's really interesting concept that just wasn't executed super well. The Cable Guy. This was a year after Batman Forever, and I was like, hey, maybe Jim Carrey, maybe he's not so over the top like he was the Riddler. Maybe he can play a villain-type character better than he did in Batman Forever. And he did, but he was still pretty over the top. Which isn't something I blame on Jim Carrey, by the way. I am going to remember his performance in this movie because of how insanely over the top he was. I'm probably about to get murdered for this one, but Cabin in the Woods. I did not enjoy it that much. I did not enjoy Cabin in the Woods very much. I did not think it was genius like so many people do. This movie just doesn't fit to my taste. I did not enjoy it that much. I Know What You Did Last Summer. Very interesting concept. Executed okay at points. Other points, this movie's just stupid. The dialogue sucks at points. And I found the ending to be so ridiculously stupid. Stuber, I've already said this multiple times in this video, but I really want to get this through to you guys. Comedy is just something I either really enjoy or it's just not really for me. I enjoyed this movie. Some of the comedy didn't work for me. I love Dave Bautista a lot, okay? You can say whatever you want about his acting, but I like the dude a lot. I enjoyed it. I would have liked this movie more. They just used so many of the same gags that it got old to me after a while. You were never really here. I'd be lying if I told you I understood this movie, but Joaquin Phoenix is great in it, so... Superman Unbound, I don't think it's a bad movie. I don't think it's a great movie. I think this movie can be boring at points. I kind of like the end with Superman beating Brainiac because humanity. Southbound. So this movie, it's a horror movie with like 6 different tales that intertwine, and I think how they intertwine them is super interesting, and some of the tales they tell are pretty good as well. Some of them are pretty bad though. Playing it cool. Chris Evans is just good in everything he does, isn't he? So this movie can get pretty tired at points because this is literally just about one thing and they drag it out for almost 2 hours, but Chris Evans gives a great performance. And this movie has some moments that are genuinely funny to me. Back in the day, I'd be lying if I did not say I don't have a bias towards Michael Rosenbaum. I absolutely love Michael Rosenbaum, so I wish I loved this movie more. I do enjoy this movie. Back to the humor. This movie just drops with the humor for me. I do not like some of the humor that's in this movie. It's just too childish for me. If it fits your taste, that's great, and I'm glad Michael Rosenbaum made the movie he wanted to make. Friday the 13th. No, not the original. The remake. I mean, it's enjoyable enough for a horror slasher film. Another movie I might get absolutely drilled for. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. I thought some of this movie was really good, and I thought parts were just okay, and then the third act, I hated the third act of this movie. I could not watch the third act in one sitting. I literally had to pause this movie because the third act was just hurting my brain. The third act of this movie is just too insane, visually and mentally, I guess, for me. The Company Men. I love Ben Affleck in this movie, and it's the only reason this movie is this high because the movie gets kind of boring at points because it's just about business and stuff. Green Lantern Emerald Knights, a bunch of stories that intertwine with each other. Some of the stories are good, some are not. overall I think it's a decent film. The Autopsy of Jane Doe. So I know this movie gets a lot of praise from some people, and I thought it was interesting. I thought it was good enough, but it didn't really grab me like some movies do, like a lot of movies do. Happy Death Day, Groundhog's Day, but horror. Pretty interesting, pretty good movie, but it can feel kind of tired at points, feel really repetitive, which is kind of the point, but Candyman, 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 Candyman. I'm not saying it a fifth time because I do not want that motherfucker to come out of my bathroom mirror. It's a pretty good horror film. It feels like it's older than it actually is, and just some of the stuff in this movie is so disgusting, which is probably why it's further down on this list, because I cannot do disgusting stuff. Killer Clowns from Outer Space, a cult classic. This movie was so stupid and it looked so cheap, but it was so good, it was so camp, it was so fun. I thought Code 8 was a pretty interesting movie, pretty enjoyable movie. I didn't love it, obviously, but I think Stephen Amell and Robbie Amell both give great performances. I especially like Stephen Amell in this movie. I just like seeing bad guys be good or good guys be bad for some reason. Fantastic Beasts, The Crimes of Grindelwald. Why is this movie this high, you say? Because I actually kind of enjoyed it. Is that a sin? Overall, it's still not a very good movie, though, and it's easily the weakest entry into the Harry Potter franchise. Grandma's Boy. You know, if I'm being honest, I just really like Nick Swardson and seeing people get stoned. I know a lot of people much prefer the original Zombieland over Zombieland Double Tap, and so do I, but I don't think there's that much of a gap between the two. I think they're pretty similar films, and I don't think the first Zombieland has anything that special that Zombieland Double Tap doesn't, but I think Double Tap was a good enough film, and I just don't really like zombies, which is maybe why I don't care for either of the movies. Us was such a disappointing movie for me. I don't think it's bad. I think it's interesting, but I don't think the execution is quite there. Compared to Get Out, this movie is not that good. Get Out is so much better than this movie. I love Get Out, and Us just wasn't for me. Green Lantern First Flight, solid enough film. I like seeing the origin of Hal Jordan and the progression of Sinestro going from a Green Lantern to forming his own corps, the Sinestro Corps. I think that's really interesting. And just showing why Hal Jordan is worthy of the Green Lantern ring, I always really enjoy that. The Other Guys. I mean, it was an okay film, but honestly, my favorite part of this movie was The Rock and Samuel L. Jackson, and they're only in it for like the first 15 minutes. Sinister 2, the only thing I really liked about this movie, or loved about this movie, I should say, I think it's an okay film, pretty solid film overall, but it's extremely disappointing compared to the first. I did like that the deputy returned for this one, and he was the main character of this film. He was a side character in the first one. I found that very interesting. A lot of people love this movie. It's not really for me. 8th Grade, I think it's a good film, but this little girl is so annoying. She is such a jerk to her dad, and I know some kids are like that in real life, but it just irritates me to see it on film. Swiss Army Man is a very unique film with two great performances in the movie by Paul Dano and Daniel Radcliffe, but this movie is just way too weird for me. Probably the only Tobey Maguire movie I've seen other than the Spider-Man movies, Brothers. I really like Jake Gyllenhaal in this film. I like the development of Tobey Maguire's character. I think it's really good showcasing what PTSD can do to someone. But I found the film to be a bit disappointing for what the cast is. Scream 3 is easily the worst of the Scream movies because it tries to retcon everything that came before it, and everything that came before it is better than this film. We are into the movies I actually enjoy now, by the way. I really love Mike Flanagan as a director, but Before I Wake is probably his weakest film that I've seen. It's not bad, but at times this movie can feel a bit slow. Other times this movie can be kind of brilliant. The Babysitter is so ridiculously stupid, but so freaking fun. This movie is so much fun to watch. It's basically just a more violent version of Home Alone, and I love it. This is a movie I can watch, just turn my brain off, and absolutely enjoy. Cabin Fever was a film with an interesting concept. It was executed good enough. I think some parts of this movie are really interesting and really well done. Some parts are just absolutely disgusting, which I hate. And here comes my Michael Rosenbaum bias again, Urban Legend. I actually really enjoyed the first half of this movie, and I think the opening scene is really eerie and legitimately creepy and scary. Then some of the other Urban Legend stuff that happens is kind of ridiculous and silly and isn't that scary. But the end of this movie, I hated. The reveal of the Urban Legend killer was just so disappointing because it was so obvious. Super 8 is really hit and miss with me. I don't really like the sci-fi element of it, which is a sci-fi movie. I knew I was going to get sci-fi going in, but I just can't get behind a lot of sci-fi stuff. I don't really know why. But I do like the fact that they're film students, they're film kids. I like that, of course. The regular show movie, this took me back to my childhood because I used to always watch regular show and then, I got older and kind of fell out of it. I think the show went for forever, 8 seasons or something. I didn't even know they had a movie before this year, but it was a pretty good movie. It just basically felt like a longer episode of the show though. There wasn't really anything special about the movie. The Witch in the Window, I think this is a really good small budget horror film. I think they have some legitimate scares in there and do the best they can with as low of a budget they had. Absentia, so this is another Mike Flanagan movie, and at points I'm really invested in the mystery, at other points I'm not really invested in the mystery. I'm kind of confused at what's going on certain points in the film, but the end everything becomes clear, so that helps. And the last 10 minutes of this movie are so emotional, it elevates this movie so much for me. House of the Devil, you gotta love 80s nostalgia. I think this was one of the first movies to bring back the 80s nostalgia. This is from 2009, I think. And I was really looking forward to this movie because I've heard very good things, and I did enjoy it, but it was just weird to me. It didn't really feel like a horror movie until 3/4 of the way into the film, and I just think it's not what I was expecting, so I was a little let down. Another stupid movie, but yet parts of this movie are really brilliant. Not another teen movie. I love Chris Evans in this movie. He is great. One of his first roles, and he nails it. And this movie is supposed to be stupid. It's a parody, and this type of movie, these are the type of parodies I gravitate to a bit more. I don't gravitate towards scary movie as you saw earlier in the list, but even though parts of this, some of the humor are childish and just really doesn't work for me. It's stupid in my opinion. Other parts of this film have humor that is brilliant and legitimately funny. As I mentioned earlier with Zombieland Double Tap, I'm not really into zombies. I do really enjoy parts of this film, but other parts I just can't really get behind. I'm not a fan of Emma Stone's character or the other girl's character. I'm sorry, I don't remember the actress that plays her. I like them more on Double Tap than I do in this movie, but I think I like Eisenberg and Harrelson more in this movie than I do in the next one. And overall, I just think the storytelling in this film is better than it is in Double Tap. I trapped the devil. Did he trap the devil, or is he just going insane? I don't know. You'll have to watch the movie to find out. I don't spoil stuff. I don't spoil too much stuff anyway. It's a pretty enjoyable film. I think the mystery around it was okay. It didn't really feel like a mystery, but it was a mystery. I like the characters in the movie. I'm pretty sure they had to finish shooting this movie in 12 days or something ridiculous like that, so I think this movie is probably as good as it could be given those circumstances. The Game. Very intriguing, very interesting at points, very convoluted at other points. I didn't really understand some of this movie, and I don't really know if the movie understood the movie, and stuff just gets repetitive at a point, and the revelation, the ending of this film, I don't understand why this movie was a thing because of that. But there were still some really good moments in this movie, some really good performances, so I did enjoy the film. I know it's entirely possible that some people watching this love Birds of Prey, but I'm not one of the people that love this movie. I wish I did. I absolutely loved Ewan McGregor as Black Mask. Black Mask was by far the standout of this movie. I don't really care for any of the other characters in this film. I think Harley has some good moments. I think Huntress is great, but she's really underutilized. I thought Black Canary was fine, and all the other characters I just don't really care about. These next two are pretty similar, directed by the same person. Midsommar first. It's a really good movie, but I'm just not that into cult-like stuff. It just doesn't really intrigue me. Then Hereditary, really the same thing. Just some parts of this movie, like Midsommar, are really disgusting. And I'm just not into culty-like concepts. Wayne's World is so funny at points. It's a pretty good movie, but just some parts of this movie are a little too meta for my liking. I know a lot of people loved Justice League Dark Apocalypse War. I did think it was a good film. I thought there was a lot of room for improvement. The characters they focused on were interesting, to say the least. It just felt like they tried to fit so much into this movie that they didn't have enough time to actually include everything and conclude this DC animated movie universe properly. Insidious Chapter 2 is a pretty big step down from the first, but I still enjoyed the movie. I think Patrick Wilson is amazing in it, and he really makes this movie for me. And like the first Insidious, some parts of this movie are actually really creepy, eerie, and scary, but I do not think this is nearly as good of a horror film as the first one is. Brie Larson gives a great performance in Room. She's amazing in it. The concept of the movie is very interesting. I enjoyed aspects of it, but the entertainment value wasn't completely there for me. Perhaps the most faithful Stephen King adaptation to date, Gerald's Game. I really enjoyed this movie, found it very interesting, very intriguing, very investing, just entertaining, up until the end. The ending of this movie is so stupid in my opinion. But Stephen King never writes good endings, so why make the movie ending better than the book ending? This is a movie that so many people love, Napoleon Dynamite. I really did like some of the humor. Some of the humor really hit with me. Other parts didn't really hit with me. This is a movie I connected on and off with. I don't connect with it as much as a lot of people do, obviously. But it was a pretty enjoyable film. I'm a sucker for Kevin Smith movies. I just love Kevin Smith as a guy and as a director, so I really did enjoy Jay and Silent Bob Reboot. If you put so many comic book references into a movie, I'm going to at least enjoy that movie. The Invitation was a very interesting movie, and I actually appeal to movies like this where they're just in one room or one house the entire movie, and they make a movie out of that and make it entertaining. I love to see things like that. You see what it wants you to. Oculus. I think the premise of this movie was good enough. As I mentioned, I love Mike Flanagan as a director. I like Brendan Thwaites a lot, in large part due to Titans, and really Karen Gillan just became a mega star after this movie. One of Matt Reed's first films, Cloverfield. It had entertainment value. I was invested in the characters. I just didn't love the sci-fi element of it. I was honestly hoping of more of a horror feel than a sci-fi feel going into this movie, but that's not really what I got. But it was still an enjoyable film. The first 20 minutes of A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood was not something I could really get behind. I did not think I was going to enjoy this movie just because of how those first 20 minutes were. It was really weird and off to me. I felt awkward watching it for some reason. But then this movie really picks up once it gets about 30 minutes in, and it has an actual story. One that's actually emotionally investing at times and relatable. The entertainment value of Ready or Not for me is way up there. I really enjoy watching this movie, and I think the rewatch factor is there as well. I've actually watched this movie twice this year. Upon second viewing, my thoughts on the movie didn't really change. I just think it's an entertaining, fun time, simple story, fun watch. I thought the ending was dumb. It Comes at Night was a pretty timely movie to watch because What Comes at Night is a virus or something. It was really interesting watching a film where you think your main characters are hiding from something, but the real threat is actually in the house with them. I honestly can't really explain this movie without spoiling it. I had a fun time watching it. I think it's a good film. I don't think I enjoyed A Quiet Place quite as much as most people do, but I really did enjoy it. It's just a movie with so little dialogue can't keep my attention super well. But for a movie with very little dialogue, this movie did a pretty damn good job of that. Minority Report. The concept of this movie is super interesting for 2002, and I think it's executed well enough. I think Tom Cruise is great in this movie. I think the movie is a little too long, and it can be uninvesting at points, though. This movie is similar to Ready or Not in terms of the entertainment value was there, but I did not really like the ending. I do think this movie actually had a story and some emotion to it, though, unlike Ready or Not really had, so that's why it's higher. The Predator is so low on this list. I am so sorry, everyone. I didn't love Predator, and yes, I've seen it for the first time this year. I don't know how I hadn't seen it before that. But the first half of this movie feels like it can be a completely different movie than the second half, and I think the second half of this movie is much, much better than the first half is. Hell or High Water, I just love Western-type movies with an older cop that's getting ready to retire, but he's got to deal with these smart criminals. I think Jeff Bridges and Chris Pine both give amazing performances in this movie, though, and overall this movie is just so enjoyable. So I had seen bits and pieces of this movie originally when it came out before this year, but I finally watched the whole movie and I loved it so much more than I expected to. Batman Ninja, I am not a fan of anime, but this movie, the story of this movie is so good and the voice cast is pretty spot on. If I had to take a guess, this is probably the most shocking entry on the list. Hit and Run. Why is it this high? Because I enjoyed this movie so much. Michael Rosenbaum's in it, as you know, as I've mentioned twice already. I love Michael Rosenbaum. I think he gives an amazing performance in this. I like Dax Shepard a lot too. Is the plot of this movie that great? It depends on how you look at it, honestly. Look, how I look at this movie is it's supposed to be a fun time. I think the characters are good enough, the storytelling is good enough. I think this movie is enjoyable. But just from a filmmaking perspective, I couldn't put it any higher on this list. Da 5 Bloods is an extremely well-made movie, but some parts of this movie just don't really work for me. They don't stick with me. This movie hasn't really stuck with me since I've watched it, but it was still a really well-made film. And parts of the movie were really enjoyable. I wish it was a little shorter, but overall, it's a damn good movie. So I honestly think the concept of Blood Diamond may be the weakest part of the movie. I think it's interesting enough, but Leo is amazing in this movie. The action scenes in this movie are great, and love is a really relevant theme in this movie, which I wasn't expecting, but I really enjoyed that about the movie. So as you'll see later on, I did not love Hot Fuzz nearly as much as I love Shaun of the Dead, but this movie was still pretty damn funny at points, and of course, Simon Pegg is great in it. I love Simon Pegg as an actor. As a comedy, I really did enjoy this movie. The Addams Family may be the movie that surprised me the most because most of the time I do not like really weird films like this. Tim Burton-esque films. I just know Tim Burton for this style of movie. He didn't direct this movie, obviously, but this was a really enjoyable movie. I think it had great character development. The dialogue in this movie was pretty sharp, and just for what it is, it's really, really enjoyable. The movie's extremely weird, but weird in the best possible way. I love mystery movies. I love old movies that have a lot of charm, so I loved Clue. I wish there were more standout performances in this movie. Tim Curry is the only performance I'm going to remember from this movie, but it was an extremely fun watch, and I just loved the unraveling of the mystery. I think this is one of the better mystery movies I've seen. Granted, I haven't seen much. I don't know a lot of mystery movies out there that are actually good, but this is one of the few. Very timely movie to watch, and probably the only reason I watched it this year, Contagion. So I'm glad that I waited a little bit before I watched this movie and didn't watch this as soon as the pandemic broke out because I probably would have been freaking out a lot more than I actually was. Seriously though, very well made film, pretty enjoyable about some very real world troubles. So I really love movies like this. Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I just love high school movies where, drugs, sex, all that. I don't know. I just enjoy watching that stuff for some reason. I guess it kinda keeps me feeling young. Even though I am young, I like feeling that way. And it's a very character-driven movie, which I also love. I really like movies that depend on the characters. What We Do in the Shadows is great. It's brilliant. It's funny. It's not completely my thing though, because I'm not a huge fan of supernatural stuff like vampires, but I enjoyed this movie a lot more than I expected because of that fact. I just love the fact that it's a bunch of vampires living together making a documentary. In today's world, vampires would probably do that. It's amazing to see. A horror movie where the characters actually have common sense. Lights Out. This movie really surprised me with how much sense some of the characters had. I was so relieved to see a horror movie that handled people the way people would actually act in the real world if that was happening to them. The Disaster Artist, very interesting concept. It's a movie about another movie being made, and it's an actual movie that exists in the real world. The Room, of course. James Franco, I think, gives an amazing performance in this movie. This is probably the best I've seen James Franco in anything, and this almost feels like a kind of respectful mockumentary. Overall, I think this movie was extremely well made, but the entertainment value wasn't completely there for me, but I really enjoyed parts of this movie. Such a well-made film, such great performances. The master. I wish I understood this movie a little better, so maybe it could go higher. I did understand a lot of the movie, you know, Joaquin Phoenix's character has PTSD and probably a lot of other stuff going on with him just because of some conversations he and Philip Seymour Hoffman have. The acting in this movie is just so incredibly beautiful, but I didn't completely get the film. I really loved the first half of Fight Club. I found it extremely intriguing and entertaining, but the second half, it just kind of falls apart for me. I didn't like the twist, I didn't like the reveal of the movie, but Brad Pitt and Edward Norton both give great performances in this movie. This is probably the best horror comedy I've ever seen. Tucker and Dale vs. Evil. This movie was legitimately funny, it was stupid at points, but it was supposed to be dumb, and it was done well. The characters were actually interesting, and this movie had a story while being funny. And the story of the movie goes deeper than surface level, which I really respect. Scream returned 11 years after initial release of the original trilogy with Scream 4, and I do love it when movie franchises do this sometimes, when they just return for one more movie over a decade later. So much time has passed, you have that nostalgia for the franchise, you're ready to see what they're gonna do. What are they going to do different? What's going to stay the same? How unique is this film going to be compared to the others? And I think Scream 4 does all of that well. It's a return to the franchise. It feels the same, yet it feels different. It's got some new characters in there. It's a new story, yet it's still the same story. Matthew McConaughey is phenomenal in Dallas Buyers Club, and there were some parts of the story I couldn't really get behind, and I kind of stopped paying attention to this movie because it started dragging a little, but overall I think this movie is really good. It's about a serious concept, not as serious as it used to be back then, but this is based on a true story, and it's just interesting to see the progression of HIV and AIDS, how quickly that spread and how quickly that got fixed. And I loved how much McConaughey's character changed in the movie. He progressed as a person after he was diagnosed with AIDS. Like at the beginning, he was discriminating all the transgenders, all the gays, like a lot of his buddies did, quote-unquote buddies, and then after he was diagnosed, he began to embrace them. Ferris Bueller's Day Off is one of the better comedies I've seen this year, and probably one of the best comedies I've ever seen, honestly. This is probably the best I've seen Matthew Broderick in anything, other than when he voiced Simba, of course. Also, the race to the house scene toward the end of the movie, the soundtrack in that scene is amazing, and it's just an extremely entertaining scene to watch. Of course, Spider-Man Homecoming had an homage to it. The scene's just perfect. Uncut Gems, one of Adam Sandler's only serious roles, and I love seeing Sandler in a serious role like this. This is the performance of his life, if you ask me. This is the best Sandler movie I have seen, without a doubt. Entertaining, emotional, captivating, heartbreaking. Good time. If this movie all the way through was as good as the first half of the movie is, this movie would probably be much higher. It would probably be one of my favorite movies ever because the first half of this movie is outstanding. Robert Pattinson is great in the film, and it just falls off a little bit in the second half. It's still a very good watch though. I was so insanely impressed by Hush because this movie has a budget of like $1 million. It just looks cheap, but what they do with the story and just the concept of this movie is great. This movie is so much better than it should have been, honestly. Mike Flanagan makes something out of really nothing here, and for an hour and a half, I was entertained watching a killer stalk and toy with this mute and deaf woman. Good boys, I gotta be honest, this movie was fucking hilarious, and I loved it. I loved the Molly plotline with the teen girls. It was great. There are gags throughout the movie, but they aren't overused, and overall, the moral of the story is honestly probably what I find to be the weakest part of the film, but it's something that is relatable to people in real life, so I'm not going to complain about it, but the comedy in this movie really hit for me. Another great horror movie where the characters are not complete idiots. Don't Breathe, a really interesting concept. Teenagers breaking into an ex-military blind man's house to rob him of money he got from going blind and his daughter dying. So really this movie tackles the question of who really is the villain of the story. And that's up for interpretation, which I absolutely love.
I am the villain of the story.
American Psycho is one of the scariest movies I will ever see because Patrick Bateman on the outside just seems like this normal, collective guy, and even the way he narrates the movie, he seems that way, but he knows he isn't. He doesn't care. He wants to kill because that's the thrill. The realism of this movie is frightening, and Christian Bale's performance in this is outstanding. Snowpiercer is a really weird movie, but the visuals in this movie, the action scenes in this movie are really well done, really entertaining, and Chris Evans gives one hell of a performance. The concept of this movie is both weird and very interesting. Sinister, I'm just gonna say it, this movie is fucked up and I love it. I love how fucked up this movie is. Has some legitimately frightening scenes, some characters you can invest with, especially Ethan Hawke's character, and overall this is just a really good horror movie. Zodiac has one stat cast, and if you don't know much about the Zodiac Killer, you will get a lot from this movie. I think you would enjoy it much more. If you already know a lot about the Zodiac Killer, the mystery element isn't going to be there for you, which kind of takes away from the film. But I didn't know a lot about the Zodiac Killer, and I actually learned some stuff from this movie, and the cast just elevated the movie for me. Robert Downey Jr., Jake Gyllenhaal, Mark Ruffalo, they're all great in the film. The final comic book entry on the list, Superman Red Son, I was very pleased with this film. I enjoyed it a bit more than I expected to, honestly. I hadn't been very impressed with DC animation lately, and this was a pleasant surprise. The Ring, another very good horror movie. I love the cast in this movie. I love all the main characters in the movie, and the revelation of what the tapes are actually showing was really, really good. The Conjuring 2, we have this movie to thank for The Nun. Not really, James Wan directed this movie once again, and it is great because of that. James Wan just knows how to build suspense. And he's a director that can legitimately frighten you. He doesn't depend on jump scares. This is a movie I've been wanting to watch for a while, Memento. So going in, I thought this movie would probably confuse me. And it confused me, but I think it's supposed to confuse you so that the movie is more interesting, because if you understood what was going on, there'd be no point in the movie, right? It was a very unique and interesting film, that is for sure. The backward storytelling was probably done about as good as it can be. This movie just isn't completely for me, still insanely good and unique though. I enjoyed Bad Education quite a bit, just showing that schools can be corrupt, just showing that anyone can be corrupt really is what this movie does. And the movie just has a realism to it that our society is always going to be corrupt, that's just the way things are. Everyone can put on a mask and pretend to be something they aren't, and Hugh Jackman is outstanding in this movie. It's not his best role, of course, he has better films, but overall this was a very solid movie. Here we are with another unique film, Argo. So it takes real-world events and incorporates it into this film while also incorporating Hollywood in a big way, and they are basically making a movie about this real event to get hostages out of Iraq or wherever they were. I loved it. So good. The characters were so great. Ben Affleck can direct a movie. He can, of course, act a movie. I love Ben Affleck. So I've never been that interested in James Bond as a character, but I finally watched my first Bond movie. I always heard Casino Royale, it's the best Bond movie, or at least the best modern Bond movie. I watched Casino Royale, and it was really damn good. Daniel Craig gives an amazing performance, the action in the movie is great. Of course, all the car chase scenes are outstanding to see, and a long-ass scene at a poker table was entertaining. I just had a good time watching a bunch of guys play poker for like an hour. The Big Sick, for sure one of the better comedies I've seen, and I don't even love this movie because of the comedy. I like it a lot because of the story, and of course the fact that it's based on a true story just elevates it. But Camille is of course hilarious in this. I like Camille just as a comedian, but unlike Stuber, this movie actually had an emotional and investing story to it that I could get involved with. I love the fact that End of Watch is entirely from a camera's point of view. Gyllenhaal's and Pena's characters just connect perfectly, and you can really see that friendship and that bond between them, which is something I love to see in movies all the time. If you can really tell there's a connection between two characters, that's always impressive to me. And also David Harbour's in this. I love David Harbour. Dr. Sleep is probably just about as good of a shining sequel you can ask for. This movie, I don't know how it could be much better. Some of the visuals could be a bit better, but I think in terms of characters, and just story, this movie is really damn good, and it works so well as a sequel to The Shining. Shutter Island. I love the mystery element of this movie. It's misleading, misguided, it's meant to be, it works perfectly. The twist got me so good. If you have not seen this movie, just watch it for the twist. It's so good. Leonardo DiCaprio and Mark Ruffalo are great in it, of course. But that twist. Of course, Ben Affleck had some personal connections to his character in the way back, which probably helps elevate this movie because Ben Affleck is really playing a character he can relate to and that he fully understands. Affleck is just so great in this movie, and just parts of this movie are so depressing and sad. I loved Bad Boys for Life. I think this is Will Smith's best performance in a long time. The side characters in this movie serve their purpose and they are likable. This movie just has a lot of heart, a lot of good action, and a pretty damn good story. This movie just shocked me. I'm as shocked as you that this movie is as high as it is. Clueless drilled me. I was not expecting to love this movie like I did. Just from the first 5 minutes of this movie, I thought I was going to hate Alicia Silverstone's character. I thought I was going to hate this movie. Then as the movie went on, I started to like her character more. She actually progressed as a character. She wasn't just a bitch. And Paul Rudd's character, I love Paul Rudd's character in this movie, and I'm happy with the choices they made in this movie. I'm not going to spoil it, but I was very pleased with the outcome of this film. I absolutely love Searching. I think the mystery of this movie was done so well, and the twists and turns, most of them got me. They really did. Just kind of like Shutter Island. I was pretty shocked with the direction the film went in, and this movie also has some very creepy parts to it where you come to the realization of certain things. You should definitely watch it if you haven't. And the final Scream movie that is going to be on this list, Scream 2. I saw the first Scream before this year. The first Scream is my favorite of the series, if you were wondering, but Scream 2 is a pretty close second. I think this is a perfect sequel. I think it delivers on everything the first one did. It's just not quite as good because it's not the original, but that doesn't take away from this movie. This movie has great character development, great suspense. It's just a fantastic horror movie. Another great horror movie, Get Out. I absolutely love psychological horror when it's done well, and this is psychological horror done at probably its best. This movie just tackles so much subject matter while being horror, while being suspenseful, and everything is just done so well. Knives Out is a mystery done extremely well. I absolutely love the mystery elements of this movie. Chris Evans gives a great performance, as he always does. But the setup for the mystery, I don't really care for just because it plays such a big role in the movie. The will of the grandfather or whatever. I wasn't that invested in that side of things, but the actual mystery I was extremely invested in. The Town is an action movie with some memorable masks, some great action, some great characters, a love story. What more could you ask for? Seriously though, as an action movie, this is such an entertaining watch, and it actually has an investing story. It's a really solid action film. Inglourious Basterds. I didn't love this movie as much as I was hoping to, but I still really did love it. The only thing that really brings it down for me is there is so much German talk, and I do not like reading. Had to read like an hour and a half of this movie. I'm over exaggerating a little bit, but I had to read a shit ton of this movie. If there's actually action during the scenes with languages that aren't English being spoken, I'm fine with it, but there were so many quiet scenes where they were speaking German that it just kind of brought it down a little. But the actual Inglourious Basterds stuff, Jews killing Nazis, I'll take that all day long. I absolutely love seeing that type of stuff. Quentin Tarantino is just a genius and knows how to make a good damn movie. Silence of the Lambs is psychological horror done at its absolute best. This movie is so terrifying, but it's mostly on the psychological side and not things that actually happen in the movie. Nothing is very visually terrifying, I don't think. I mean, Hannibal Lecter kind of eats a dude's face, but anyway, this movie actually showcases so much about psychology and society. Of course, touching on the psyche of all kinds of people, it touches on cannibalism, LGBT, all of that stuff. The movie is just extremely interesting, entertaining. Anthony Hopkins gives one damn good performance. Watching Dazed and Confused was just such a fun time. It's a fun movie, great movie, just extremely entertaining. Some good characters, some memorable lines. Ben Affleck's in it, gives a great performance. Matthew McConaughey's in it. Alright. This is just a fun movie with fun characters. It's just an overall fun time and great movie. Black Klansman obviously touches on some serious political issues, some serious issues with our society, and it does that so extremely well while also being so entertaining. I think John David Washington and Adam Driver are both phenomenal in this movie, and I love both their characters. I just love all the detective work that's within the movie and them just trying to get inside of the KKK and put a stop to everything. The Raid was a movie that just absolutely floored me after I saw it. This was some of the best action I have ever seen, and I didn't even mind that none of this movie is English. I just had such a good time watching this movie, and the action was incredible. It kept me entertained, no doubt. The Shining is one of the best horror movies for a reason. It's just that damn good. Nicholson's performance in this movie is, as everyone says, outstanding. And the most terrifying things in the movie are the real world things. It's not the hotel. It's not that the hotel is haunted. It's the realism of just some man going insane and murdering people with an axe. The Social Network, very entertaining watch, very well made film. Just great storytelling with a great cast, some great characters, showing how business in this world really works. Someone always gets screwed, while also being very entertaining. Joaquin having sex with a virtual version of ScarJo? Yes, please, give it to me. Her is a great film. Joaquin Phoenix is amazing in it, and Scarlett Johansson, even though it's just her voice, gives a great performance. Chris Pratt and Amy Adams are great as well. This is just a movie with a stacked cast and a very, very interesting concept. Pretty weird concept, but kind of realistic in today's society. And the movie just somehow gets you emotionally invested in a man's relationship with a computer. Inception, once again, a great cast, very interesting concept, great director in Christopher Nolan, some exciting visuals. Of course, you're gonna get a good movie out of this. It's a pretty deep movie with a lot of layers to it, but I think everything is explained perfectly clear in the film. Going into this, I was expecting to be pretty confused because I always heard this movie was confusing, but I pretty much got everything in the movie. Getting into the top 10. My favorite comedy of all time is Shaun of the Dead. I am so glad I watched this movie. It is so hilarious. I usually don't like zombies, but since this is a comedy, it's a damn good comedy too. Great dialogue, sharp dialogue, great characters. Simon Pegg gives a hell of a performance, and I just got really invested in this movie. Catch Me If You Can is insanely good. The cast is outstanding, and I just love seeing this movie. It's so much fun. It's just this kid that didn't know what he was going to do with his life after high school. You know, he had some troubles, some family troubles, and the way he takes his life is in the way of crime, and it's just interesting how stuff plays out. He takes on so many identities. It's just really intriguing and fun to watch. Anton Chigurh is one of the best movie villains I have ever seen in any film, and No Country for Old Men is just directed beautifully, written beautifully. The dialogue is excellent in this film, and I think this movie is pretty perfectly paced. I don't think it goes too long without any action, and the quiet scenes don't take up way too much time, and when they are on screen, it's often timed just right, for me at least. Halloween is definitely one of the best horror movies I've seen for the time, 1978. This movie is excellent. Such a memorable and haunting score. It goes so well with the movie, and this movie is so basic, so simple, but that's what makes this movie so good, the simplicity of it. Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman are both amazing in The Prestige. Michael Caine is excellent as well, and just to see the rivalry between two magicians, them trying to show each other up, and the mystery element of this movie as well, is insanely intriguing, interesting to watch. This movie is really smart and showcases the relationship between characters in an excellent way, and I absolutely love the twist it made the movie for me. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, this was just an insanely fun watch. I think every scene, every moment Brad Pitt is on screen is phenomenal. It is basically perfect. Brad Pitt gives the performance of his life in this movie. I think this is the best thing I've seen him in, and Leo gives a noble performance as well. But Brad Pitt's character in this just made the movie for me. One of the best characters I've seen in the movie. One of the most entertaining characters I've seen within a movie at least. And just Quentin Tarantino rewriting history once again. I love to see it. As of right now, this is the best horror movie I've ever seen. It follows. So the concept of this movie is extremely scary, and the concept is actually scarier than the actual movie is. Nothing within the movie is too scary, but just the thought of this, the fact that this movie is so real, and basically just one big metaphor, is scary, and the characters are written well within this movie. None of them are really stupid, which I really enjoy, and I think it's interesting that other people can't see the sex demon, but whoever it is following can. And I think the ending to this movie is perfect. If I'm being honest, this is perhaps the most well-made movie on the list, The Shawshank Redemption, but entertainment-wise, I enjoyed some movies more, but of course this has to be this high because it is a very enjoyable movie, and it's written so well. Everything about this movie is pretty much perfect. There were just some things in it that slowed it down for me entertainment-wise. Mostly the schooling and education stuff, I pretty much loved everything else. Almost everything about Django Unchained is pretty much perfect. There are some moments that are a little slow to me, but overall this is extremely enjoyable, insanely good dialogue, funny moments, great action, exciting visuals, great cast. Quentin Tarantino once again rewriting history on such a serious subject matter, and it's done so extremely well. But my favorite first watch of the year so far, I've already said, I absolutely love mysteries when they are done well, and Prisoners is the best mystery-based movie I have ever seen. Is the setup for the movie and the driving force of the movie original? No, it isn't. Kids getting kidnapped in movies isn't really that original, but everything else about this film is perfection in my opinion. Hugh Jackman gives a performance of his life. This is the best I've seen Hugh Jackman in anything, counting all his Wolverine appearances. I think Jake Gyllenhaal is pretty good in this as well, but Hugh Jackman is just outstanding in this movie. He shows so much emotion in the movie. There's a scene where he just loses it. There's also a scene where he acts in the movie, so it's like acting within acting, and I absolutely love seeing that type of thing in movies when it's done that well. And this movie ends on such an ominous note. It's pretty perfect. One of the best movie endings I have ever seen. Also, the choreography in this movie is perfection. This is one of the most perfectly choreographed movies I have seen as well. Okay, so I'm done gushing about Prisoners now. If you stuck around for the whole video, thank you very much. I appreciate it. So, that was every first watch of 2020 I have seen so far, first half of 2020. A lot of movies. Let me know what your favorite first watch of the year is down in the comments below. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and if you stuck around for the whole thing, that is very much appreciated. Thank you so much. I will see you guys next time.